Okay, so welcome everybody and thank you for joining the webinar today. So I'm Matt Riddell and I'm a contract manager at the National Lottery Community Fund, and I work as part of the team delivering A Better Start. So the purpose of the webinar today is to share with you the story of Big Little Moments and the research findings, and to also share the resources developed through the campaign. So today's presenters from 23Red, we have Kasia, who you've already met there.
Hello.
Sadie Westwood. They'll present the story of Big Little Moments, the challenge, our approach, and the execution of the campaign. And from Ecorys, we have James Ronicle, who will share with us an overview of the evaluation and the findings. Okay. Next slide, please, Kasia.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay. So I'll start with the background in a moment when we get onto the next slide.
Here we are. Ooh.
Sorry about that. I'll start with the background to the campaign. So the Big Little Moments campaign is part of A Better Start. A Better Start is a £250 million investment by the National Lottery Community Fund over 10 years in 5 local areas, and it aims to improve children's social and emotional development, speech and language, diet and nutrition, and it also aims to change the way early years services are commissioned and delivered. A Better Start is the largest strategic investment made by the National Lottery Community Fund. Through A Better Start, we teamed up with the A Better Start grant holders in Bradford, Lambeth, Southend, Blackpool and Nottingham to co-commission 23Red and Ecorys to deliver and evaluate the campaign we now know as Big Little Moments. Why did we do this? Well, science tells us that social and emotional and language development are important child development outcomes and that they are closely linked. And this contract was identified as a priority during our consultation with the Better Start grant holders at the beginning of the programme. All of the partnerships recognised the importance of more effective and consistent local messaging to caregivers as a means of improving outcomes for children. So initially, A Better Start grant holders planned to conduct their own campaigns on this subject, but through collaboration with the fund, they came together and identified the wider benefits of a joint local campaign with consistent messaging across the 5 areas. So now Kasia and Sadie will present the story of Big Little Moments, starting with the challenge given to them in this contract.
Thanks, Matt. So we were given the challenge to communicate the essential role of those social, emotional and language skills in early brain development. So we needed to firstly drive understanding of their importance amongst those parents and caregivers. And then secondly, and importantly, illustrate ways of putting those into practice. So ultimately, what we needed to do was increase the number and frequency of effective caregiving interactions between caregivers and their young children. So the campaign required a behaviour change approach, which is a long-term strategy, and we know is something that does take time. So our campaign was really important to be that starting point and raise awareness and initiate the change that we needed over time. And we did this through engagement with our audiences and through the provision of tools, materials, resources that can continue to support that behaviour change journey. I think we need to, next slide, thanks Kasia. There is a lot of science behind the topic, so we needed to make sure that that was all captured within our strategy. So the campaign builds on the core story of early childhood development research paper that came from the Frameworks Institute and Harvard University. And this translates the science into themes and metaphors, which basically make it a lot easier for our audience to understand and to make it feel more accessible to them. This approach has been used before in Canada, but believe it was a first for us here in the UK. And the key scientific insights into that early brain and biological development were drawn from that research, really underlying the importance of early years and caregiving. And based on this, specific behaviours were identified that caregivers can adopt to improve the development of those young children. So these behaviours are really simple, achievable ways for our caregivers and parents to interact with children during everyday situations. So such as responding to infants' vocalization, so whether that's their gurgling or their cooing, and non-verbal communications as well, such as pointing. And also looking at how we can express affection regularly to our infants and young children through language, tone of voice, and those facial expressions. Next slide, please, Kasia. The behaviours really drew heavily on 3 metaphors. So again, based on the Framework Institute's report and research, we know that metaphors can really sort of override that default thinking and help people to remember important points and pass those very easily as well from person to person. So 3 were identified here to aid that understanding of the rationale for those behaviours and also aid that stickiness, the memorability that we wanted to keep them front of mind and to keep them effective. So we have brain building, which talked about building young brains like houses, starting with laying those foundations to create the stable, strong mind later on in life so they can better withstand those pressures. We have save and return, using a game of ping pong to encourage that back and forth interactions. And then finally, the parts of the brain involved in development are sort of inextricably linked and mutually reinforcing, like the strands of the rope woven together. And strengthening one of those strands really helps all the others as well be strong too. So they were really good metaphors for us to kind of refer to. And then using a theory of change model that seeks to impact child development helps us understand 2 key mechanisms for change to improve that self-efficacy. Firstly, building parents' knowledge of the importance of the early years childhood development, so the why, and in addition, giving them some very simple to follow techniques, the what and how. And then secondly, we looked at creating those social norms that others are seeing this through overseeing media choices in their area. The more we see other people doing stuff, the more we are likely to do as well. So that's sort of our challenge and how we've approached it. I'm going to hand over to Kasia, who's going to take you through how we've brought it to life and implemented it.
Thank you, Sadie. Yes, the creative idea. So our creative challenge was to translate that complex science, bringing the behaviors to life in a simple and relatable ways, while demonstrating how these behaviors could be achieved every day. And we call them, as you know, big little moments, as every interaction, no matter how small, could have a big impact on young brains. How did we develop the campaign? How did we get there? So to be relevant for all 5 partnerships, we have established a number of creative principles, taking the research, the strategy, and the local insights into consideration. You'll see the number of creative principles that I'm not going to kind of go through. Just wanted to kind of make you aware that it was very important that the creative executions were grounded in insights from each of the Better Start areas. So we visited each of the locations, and that provided very valuable understanding about local services and audiences, their literacy level, socioeconomic background, language and cultures. So starting from, establishing the right tone of voice, as you see first bullet there, be positive, supportive and encouraging, but don't judge or point fingers, via the visual appeal, ensuring the characters are friendly and positive, and messaging, ensuring that the body copy uses the metaphors that explain why this matters, to also remembering the visibility of the brand, the visibility of the National Lottery Community Fund, and also the partnerships that we created this campaign for. And with these principles in mind, we have created a number of friendly, gender-neutral, positive characters that would appeal to our diverse audience. You see 15 behaviors over here that we portrayed by those characters. And just, I give you a moment to scan through all 15 of them. but as you would see, each of the behavior has a specific name. The name is short, the name is understandable, and it literally links to the picture that it represents. And then, we collaborated with 5 partnerships to land the right messaging. It was very important that that message would work for every local A Better Start site and their audiences, but also work well on the wider campaign level. We've tested the concepts firstly, and then from the testing, we received the key outtakes that kind of made us to create those final assets here. What we've learned through this testing is that creative worked well when the headline had a literal match to the visual, and also when the behaviors were clear and specific about what caregivers should do, so talking to the bump or saying what they see. The behaviors were described using metaphors that Sadie mentioned up front. So it's a house metaphors, which says baby brains are like houses. They need building, and they are being built even before they are born. This house metaphors was used in many behaviors, and it was very well understood. The second one, serve and return metaphor, was largely understood over here, making playful noises and pointing to the things. It is a kind of like a game of catch when you make an action and then you get the return. It's like passing this ball back. So that metaphors was well taken. The rope weaving metaphors, however, was quite complex. So we have not used it in describing those behaviors. We've used it in some long copies, but to make it simple, make it understandable, we use those 2 metaphors. But also what we've learned through the testing was that the terms like build their brains, learn, grow, work very well to convey the benefit. Hence, each execution, we've ended up with a line, these little moments help your child learn and grow in a big way. That was proven to be very much liked by our audience. And then how did we bring this campaign to life? So as mentioned by Matt earlier, the campaign was activated across 5 partnerships. We worked with those partnerships together, collaborated to create the best possible outcome for each of them. And the campaign was delivered in 2 ways. It was launched through paid media, but also amplified by partnerships using a mix of own and paid for channels, bespoke to each area and based on the local knowledge and resources. The creative assets that we have developed, there was a set of them. There was a set of paid media creative, and they included animated films, animated MPU banners. They've created static and animated posts for social media as well. And later in the program, we have developed the advocates video. So in addition to animations, we created those videos for each partnership, and the videos portray the real parents and caregivers talking about their experience. So how they practice big little moments with their children, why does it matter to them, and how it affects their children. This asset was very much welcomed by local sites, and we've also created short forms of those assets that we included into paid media campaign. Long films, each of the partnership put on their local websites and other own digital channels. But obviously, local amplification was very important over here. And then, we want the regional partners to amplify it on the local level, making the campaign as visible as possible in their areas. Therefore, we developed a toolkit of assets, which included press assets, printed resources, included radio script, out-of-home resources, bus and taxi wraps, also digital resources like screens or social posts. Those assets were free to be downloaded. The templates could be adapted, and then a local partnership could add their own logo to it, their own website. They obviously manage any print production at their end, and also media bookings requirements locally. We've also provided local sites with the assets to build their landing page for each of their websites. And here is a big reveal. So definitely the material was put in use. As you could see, there was some, we given some amplification ideas. They were very much welcome by the local sites. As you could see, they've been implemented throughout the cities. And would it be a bus stops, would it be buses, would it be taxi wraps, events, and also those famous inflatables. Michelle, I'm sure you're here. I know we've been talking about this many times. Yes, that you could see that it's been implemented throughout to reach as many caregivers as possible. And now just wanted to shortly talk to you about paid media strategy and performance. What we have done here, we've worked with the expert media strategist. The company was called December 19 to develop the pay for media campaign plan, ensuring that a variety of different channels were considered and compared against the set of key criteria. The key criteria were budget efficiency, geographic targeting, demographic targeting, and standouts. So budget was quite limited, so it was vital we achieve the best value for money by maximizing reach and awareness. For efficiency, we wanted to reach as many caregivers as possible within the partnership ward areas only. Demographic targeting, our audience is broad, so we wanted to kind of reach people en masse, but we could use indicators to focus on those likely to have young children, and mass cut through, drive frequency to connect and drive action from the busy audiences. Role of media. So yes, the media plan was focused on digital channels due to cost effectiveness and the ability to precisely target specific audiences based on their location and other data sets. To generate the awareness of an engagement, to keep the campaign in front of mind, the recommended plan included social media and mobile display. Facebook allowed us target within 1 kilometer radius, and mobile display advertising allowed us to target specific postcodes. These platforms were ideal for optimization, so we could monitor the performance at the regular intervals and optimize the creative accordingly. So over here you see that we wanted to do social media, first quarter mobile display, second quarter, then repeat the social media and carry on with mobile display. However, with digital media being so easy to optimize, what we've learned that the mobile display performed very well in comparison to social media campaign, and had very positive very positive outcomes of increased impressions, good view completion rate, and constant optimization. So gathering the data via cookies gave us the constant opportunity to optimize the campaign and improve it. And that, led the recommendation to proceed with the same mobile display strategy for Q3 and Q4. And here's summary of media campaign performance. So I mean, they are loads of big numbers. So just wanted to kind of simplify it in a way and highlighted those big numbers that matter. So the campaign did very well at raising the awareness and reaching parents and caregivers in those 5 areas. It reached over 13 million impressions, which means that the campaign materials were displayed over 13 million times. Also, there was over 66,000 clicks to the campaign pages, and the views of the video post was over 550,000. What we also know that James is going to talk about this a little bit later, but 39% of people actually who say have seen this campaign. You would also see that, you know, for mobile display especially, the views of the video was very high. It was 30%, 30.4%, and in comparison with the industry average, it reached and exceeded the benchmark of 30%. So yes, I think this is the overview of the media campaign and then the first results. And now I will just hand over to James, who will take us through the campaign evaluations and top line findings. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Kasia. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is James Ronicle. I'm an Associate Director at Equoris, and I oversaw this evaluation. I didn't manage it. Our manager actually went on to become a maths teacher, and I think she might be watching now. So most of the credit for this does go to Kate Merriam, but I think she's in the classroom, so I have to take the mantle on the presentation. If you could move on to the next slide, please, Kasia. I'll just talk through firstly what our task was as the evaluators, and then a little bit of the headline findings and what I think the implications of learnings of those findings are. So our task was to assess the impact of the campaign, both on the sort of awareness of the behaviours amongst caregivers and also whether this led to any behaviour change. And there were 5 key areas that we were looking for impact around: sort of awareness of the campaign, knowledge of the behaviours themselves, whether the sort of understanding of the sort of science behind those behaviours became embedded, whether that changed people's intentions for behaviour change, and whether that changed actual behaviour as well. If you could move to the next slide, Kasia, I'll explain the method of how we did this. So we adopted what's known as a difference in difference approach. This is a survey-based approach where we ask people to report on their levels of awareness and also levels of behaviour. We surveyed people before the campaign, sort of capture a baseline of what people's level of these behaviours and awareness was before the campaign was launched. And then we repeated that survey after the campaign to look at changes as well. We also ran the identical survey in 12 areas that were very similar to the 5 A Better Start areas in terms of demographics and economy. And so what we were looking for to measure impact was an increase in understanding and reporting of behaviour from before to after the campaign in the ABS sites, which was greater than what we saw in our comparison areas. That's what we were looking for. We supplemented that with some qualitative research because the survey would tell us levels of change. Because of our comparison, we could maybe assume that it was as a consequence of the campaign, but we wanted to do some qualitative research to sort of test that attribution and also understand what might be driving the impact as well. So we had interviews with 21 practitioners across the 5 sites and focus groups with 43 caregivers as well. Kasia, if you could move on, I'll explain a little bit about what we found. So I'll talk you through each of our 5 areas that we were measuring. So the first one was awareness. So we asked people in our survey, had you seen this campaign? We showed them some images and said, do you recognize these? As Kasia said, there was very good levels of awareness. Close to 40% of the people that we surveyed were aware of the campaign. Particularly, we asked people where they heard about the campaign, and the majority of people said social media. So the social media strategy that Kasia described was clearly effective. We also looked at the demographics of the people that had seen the campaign compared to not, and we saw that those that had seen the campaign sat in the sort of more vulnerable groups, if you like, in terms of more likely to be in social housing, more likely to have lower qualifications, more likely to have either part-time work or be out of work. So the sort of aspiration of the campaign sort of reaching vulnerable groups, we also saw to be successful. In terms of knowledge, we asked people before the campaign, are you aware of these behaviours? And we asked them the same question after the campaign. And we saw statistically significant increases in the percentage of people saying they were aware and knew of these behaviours. Around 5 to 10% more people were saying they knew of these behaviours before the campaign, after the campaign than before it. And this was greater than what we saw in the comparison areas. So we also saw very good evidence that the campaign had increased people's awareness and knowledge of the behaviours. We then tried to look at understanding, and as Sadie had said, one of the aspirations was to sort of communicate across the science underpinning the behaviours through the use of the two metaphors and a little bit of the third that Kasia described. And we asked people in our pre-survey and post-survey, why do you think this is an important behaviour? One of those options was the metaphor, and then the others were plausible explanations, but not the ones that the campaign had given. In order to see whether understanding had increased, what we were expecting to see was after the campaign, more people would be selecting the metaphors as the reason. And we didn't see that. We also, in our focus groups of caregivers, asked them to explain why they thought these behaviours might be important. And again, we were sort of anticipating seeing people using the metaphors to describe the behaviours, and we didn't see that either. So whilst I think we saw increase of knowledge and people sort of picked up the behaviours, they didn't necessarily pick up the metaphors that sort of went alongside them. We also, as I said, tried to capture, look at behaviour change, and we asked people before the campaign to sort of quantify how many times in the last week they had done these behaviours and how many times they intended to do them in the following week. And we asked that same question in the follow-up questionnaire. And our hypothesis was that if the campaign had led to behaviour change, in those people that saw the campaign, we would see more people reporting doing these behaviours after the campaign and intending to do more in the following week. And again, we did not see increases in behaviour change from after the campaign to before it. So sort of the summary of what we found in the survey and in the focus groups as well was good reach of the campaign, increase in people's knowledge of the behaviours that were being promoted, but we didn't necessarily in those 12 months see a sort of embedding of the understanding underpinning the behaviours or actual behaviour change itself. What we did see in the practitioner interviews, a lot of the practitioners that we interviewed did describe how they used the campaign, particularly sort of the images, to help with structured conversations, so with targeted specific conversations with individuals. They found the materials very effective at being able to communicate to people why these behaviours were important. And those practitioners did report that those people they spoke to did then go back to them and say how helpful they had found them and how they had been changing behaviour. So we might not have seen large-scale behaviour change picked up in our surveys, but we did pick up anecdotal examples of where we'd seen smaller levels of behaviour change. Kasia, if you just move on to the final slide, I'll just sort of give my own reflections of what I think some of the lessons and implications are from this, and I think Sadie's going to pick some of those up as well. I think the first thing to do is to remember the theory of change that Sadie introduced here, which I've put in this slide, and that if you just think of this as a grey rainbow, the darkest grey arch right at the bottom before you get to the child's behaviour in the red is the behaviour change, is the parenting behaviour. And all of those other parts of the theory of change are all the different factors that impact on the behaviour that a caregiver gives. And as you can see, there's all sorts of things around the emotional context, the local economy, the culture in that area, how they were parented themselves, their emotional well-being, self-efficacy, ability. And those two red arrows are the two areas that the campaign is able to impact upon. So I think in trying to look at these findings and saying, well, this campaign did not seem to lead to behaviour change after 12 months, I think what you have to ask is that because, should we expect a campaign of this nature to lead to behaviour change in 12 months? So is the problem the expectation or the implementation? And I think for us, bearing in mind this theory of change and all of the things that are needed to impact on behaviour, I think the lesson is perhaps it would be an unrealistic expectation to expect a campaign of this nature to achieve behaviour change in 12 months. So whilst we were asked and did look at it, I think it was probably ambitious to expect that. So I think perhaps a lesson learned for people planning campaigns of this nature is just to be humble in expectations around what it can achieve in a 12-month period. Having said that, I think we did in our research capture some quite interesting lessons learned that might explain some of the areas where we didn't see an impact. And one of them was that whilst a lot of the people we spoke to said they definitely recognized the campaign, they definitely were familiar with the monsters, they kind of reported that they couldn't necessarily remember all of the behaviors, and there were quite a lot of them. There were 15 in total, 8 prioritized. And I think people were saying, if we really wanted to drill down these behaviors and really drill down the science behind them, maybe we should have focused on fewer. And I think we're learning that now in the comms around coronavirus, that the fewer and simpler the messages are, the more they land. And I think perhaps that's a lesson learned for campaigns of this nature as well. We also found that whilst the monsters are incredibly engaging, caregivers' general initial impression was this was aimed at children. And so didn't necessarily, they engaged with them with their children. They didn't necessarily read the text because they didn't always think it was aimed at them. So that might be a lesson learned as well. And I think the final lesson as well, which I thought was really interesting, was how practitioners found this campaign really effective. And although this was just anecdotal, it seems what we found was where the biggest impact was when the campaign was used in conjunction with practitioners around more in-depth and more structured conversations. So I think that's perhaps something for other people to take away from this, if they're interested in doing something similar, is to recognize that where this campaign can possibly have the most effect is when the campaign is done alongside practitioners using the materials as well. So in conclusion, I think what we found was the campaign definitely laid a very good foundation within its 12 months, and there are perhaps future steps to take to really see that behaviour change embed. And I think Sadie is going to pick up on next steps. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Yeah, really kind of just to summarise on those points, because I guess we've got 2 parts of the work that we did, which was around the campaign in terms of that reach and awareness. So from a campaign perspective, we can look at that. And then we've also got the sort of that longer term behaviour change piece. So looking at them in 2 ways. And as I set out right at the beginning, and as James has touched on there as well, behaviour change does take a long time, and just to sort of reiterate, this is the starting point in initiating that journey. So I think we can look on it very well and positive to see that the campaign was engaging and well received, as well as raising that awareness, that much needed awareness amongst the parents and caregivers in our 5 locations, and ultimately really providing encouragement to them. So kind of like one of our metaphors, actually setting the groundwork here, laying those foundations for us to build upon. And as James said, whilst the evaluation didn't show any overall changes in behaviour amongst parents and caregivers, those interviews with early years staff do show us that the campaign did facilitate those deeper conversations. So it's understanding now where and how the campaign messaging can evolve and support as well those interactions, definitely. And just to reiterate on those learnings, there's definitely some really good learnings in there for us to build upon. That we've touched on, and just to kind of sort of simplify those in 3 ways for us to kind of leave you with those. 1, make it easy to implement. So whilst those behaviours were themselves easy and helpful, what we found as well was to make it even more useful and overcome some of the barriers that our audience was we're receiving, it's like, how do we provide the times and the ways? So it was time that was always coming up as a barrier as well. So how can we help them actually implement them? So it's great that they're there and they're easy and I understand them, etc. But now I need to do it. So how can we actually get them into that next stage of action and help them with those? We did talk about simplifying. So again, let's reduce those number of behaviours. It's too hard to remember all of them. So we would absolutely consider reducing the number of those and putting a big focus behind just a couple of those behaviours, and then looking to add further behaviours further down the line. But I think most importantly, and coming back to the behaviour change point, is continue. And as we've said, this is really just the start. Ideally, the sort of the paid media and the campaign part of it itself, we would certainly recommend running over a longer period of time. What we found was obviously the reach and the awareness was there, and we did learn how to optimize that campaign using the media channels that we did. So it would be great to kind of experiment with those a bit more and actually see where we can push that. But I think ultimately we've got a great set of materials and assets here now as well. And again, as James had mentioned, we know that practitioners are using them, and actually that we're finding them really effective when they are used together as part of that wider parenting support. So don't just think of them there as on their own and that the campaign's finished. Keep integrating them with the work that you're doing and the wider parenting activity, and that will be where they will become most effective. Over to Matt.
Thanks, Sadie, Kasia, James. Just a quick point of clarification for James: characters, not monsters.
I was going to say exactly the same. I was like, well, actually, we like to call them characters. They know monsters, James.
I'm so sorry.
Thanks very much for that. So I think from what you've heard from the presenters, this is a starting point, and we know behaviour change takes a long time and requires collaboration and on-the-ground activation. But what we hope at the fund here is that the materials and messages from the campaign will be used well into the future. So to support this, we asked 23Red to develop the materials for a Better Start grant holders and to provide the materials and guidance in a toolkit for other non-ABS areas to use, and they were shown on the slides earlier. So these materials are all available to download from our website, and in the toolkit you'll see a campaign overview outlining all of the behaviours and messages. There's the creative resources and links to the design files and templates. There's design guidelines and ideas on how to implement the campaign, localization rules, principles. We'll also be sharing the video that we're going to play next. And there'll be a slide deck explaining in detail the science that underpins the campaign and how we developed this. So we hope that the recommendations from the evaluation will be useful and that people will use the materials developed to promote and encourage more Big Little Moments. So just to thank you for your time and participation in the webinar just now. If you have any questions, please do email them to abetterstart@tnlcommunityfund.org.uk. And would like to leave you now with the video that encapsulates the Big Little Moments.
Okay, let's hope that the technology won't fail us. Here we go.
Babies and toddlers are growing and learning every day. Who are you? What's that? How does that work? And science has shown that what they learn in their first 4 years of life can shape their future forever. So the National Lottery Community Fund launched A Better Start, a programme across 5 key locations aimed at helping children have the best possible start to life. We wanted to show that every interaction, no matter how small, can have a big impact on young brains. Enter Big Little Moments. The Big Little Moments campaign introduced complicated scientific concepts in a way that didn't look like science at all. Grounded in research done by the Frameworks Institute and Harvard University, 15 behaviours were brought to life that build healthy neural pathways in little ones' brains. Taking into account our audience's various ethnic backgrounds, cultures and literacy levels, we created fun, eye-catching characters that spoke to everyone.
That's wonderful! That's wonderful!
That's wonderful!
Yep, we even took accents into account. Memorable metaphors educate caregivers on the many little moments that could make a big difference.
Talking to the bump. Babies' brains are like houses. They need building, and they're being built even before they are born. Saying what they see. It's like they're throwing you a ball. When you respond, you're passing that ball back.
Whether it's building language skills while getting dressed or working on cognitive development while waiting for a bus, the exercises fit into parents' busy days. Demographic and geographic targeting was used on digital channels to get into the hands of our hard-to-reach audience. Then it was packaged as a toolkit for local A Better Start partners. Thanks to them, the message was spread throughout the 5 key communities, across buildings, taxis, and even inflatables. A Better Start partners also played a crucial role in helping to get the campaign out there.
It's really important that we support parents to understand the critical importance of building babies' brains, establishing those relationships from the first moments of life and during pregnancy.
And it's really lovely to see the positive impact that it has on the children's development.
The greatest achievement? Seeing caregivers and their children sharing more big little moments every day.
Our meaningful moments start right from the moment he wakes up.
She's bubbly, she's kind, she has manners, and that's all from like little moments that I am teaching her. The everyday moment is good for their development in the sense that it helps them physically, emotionally, and socially.
It just makes them confident and strong and independent. It makes them their own little people.
Wow. It's beautiful content, isn't it? It makes me emotional. So actually, at the end, you know, looking at this film, I just wanted to thank all 5 partnerships that help us to create that content that provided us with the access, obviously, to their location, their families, and then to create something like that, which it's so nice to watch. So really just to end this webinar, we will follow up with an email and we will make this presentation available to you. You would see in the presentation a couple of hyperlinks. One link goes to executive summary of the evaluation findings that James was talking about. There was another link which goes to the National Lottery Community Fund, where you would find the Legacy Toolkit and also the films and the presentation. So we will follow up with the summary note. So we hope you enjoyed the webinar. It will be available as the recording as well. And then thank you very much for your time.